IVM.
Hello, we're Team Explainer. Welcome to an all-new episode of Press Decode, a weekly podcast where we take Explainer's mission to declutter the news one step further. Check out our newsletter for more stories and follow us at ExplainerIn to keep up with all the fun things we plan for our Explainer fam. So sit back, relax, and don't let the news give you the blues. I'm Sara, your host for the day, and we have a full house with both Vagda and Prafula. As always, we have 3 segments for you. For our big story, we're looking at that slap that was heard around the world. Yep, you know the one. In our Food for Thought segment, we're sticking to the realm of the Oscars and talking about the Indian entry to the Academy Awards, Writing with Fire. And then in our final segment, we will be roasting and toasting our fave and least fave items. Okay, so now on to our big story for the week. Unless you've been living under a rock, I'm assuming you've heard of Will Smith smacking comedian Chris Rock on stage for making a G.I. Jane joke about his wife, Jada Pinkett. Rock said, Jada can't wait for G.I. Jane 2, referring to her shaved head. This was especially insensitive because Pinkett has been open about her hair loss due to alopecia, though it is not clear if Rock knew about it. Smith first offered a non-apology of sorts during his acceptance speech and then directly apologized to Rock in a public Instagram post. The fallout has been fairly minor, however, for the parties directly involved. Rock has declined to press charges, and the Academy's initial tweet said it does not condone violence of any form, but later issued a statement condemning the actions of Mr. Smith and kickstarted a formal review around the incident. Sources inside the Academy said its members had strongly considered removing Smith from the ceremony, but decision makers were not able to coordinate in time to take a call. Now, there has been discourse and counter-discourse and some counter-discourse. And of course, the large threads of yarn on Twitter. Is it toxic masculinity? Is it racism when they're both Black artists? Or is it just an error of judgment? Well, there's a lot, but I got to ask, like both Vagda and Prafula, what has been the most outrageous hot take that you guys have come across? I will start, just so that you don't take it, because the most brilliantly outrageous take, there was a bizarre connection about a supposed Will Smith doctrine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Are you confused? Allow me. To explain in brief, it drew a connection between the two because of a mismatch in quantums of violent reactions. So just like Smith went and smacked, Putin went and invaded.
Oh yeah, my favorite is, Will Smith is an abuser. And the other is Jada Smith is an abuser. Why? Because Will got up and slapped Chris Rock because he saw Jada's reaction. So people were like, he's going to have a hard time when he goes home if he doesn't do anything. And in his acceptance speech, Will Smith said, love made me do it. And then everybody just jumped on it and said, I was a domestic violence, or my mother was a domestic violence victim. And this really triggered me. And, just.
Nice.
One that I liked and I thought it really summed up everything was this user Jim Caddick on Twitter. He said, I've seen so many completely opposite opinions on my timeline about the slap that I have officially concluded that Chris is wrong, Will is wrong, Jada is wrong, Oscars are wrong, comedy is wrong, violence is wrong, and everyone on Twitter is wrong.
Everyone on Twitter is always correct. Excuse me.
That is also my opinion.
Excuse me, everyone on Twitter is always correct.
Okay then, Sara. To understand why everyone was bemoaning the imminent Oscars takes last night, first we have to define what Twitter is in 2022. It's a fandom app for current events. The users on there don't have anything in common other than an increasingly pathological need to consume either news as content or content as news.
Moving on swiftly beyond that scathing attack, I am going to link to this wonderfully amusing yet painful read about the sheer range of hot takes that have emerged over the last couple of days. I insist that each one of you have to read it. It is amazing. But beyond all the hot takes, honestly, what do you guys have to say about this insane incident that has truly taken the internet by a storm? Especially since we as Indian women are all too familiar with this whole idea of using violence to protect women and our honor and safety and whatnot.
Of course, after saying that there are hundreds and thousands of takes on Twitter, you ask us for our take. Very nice.
Of course. We're on a podcast, guys.
Okay, so my first thoughts were, what the hell, this can't be true. Of course this is staged, but like, because how is this truly happening? It can't be real. Apparently it wasn't staged. My second thought was, violence is just not okay, man. Like, words are enough to show you stand up for your wife, and that's it. And third, why did she need protection? She sat right there. She could have done something if she wanted to. She rolled her eyes and that was her reaction, you know. Anyway, this whole protector complex, you know, toxic masculinity and all, which Will Smith only laminated, framed, and hung on the wall with his defense, where he took on the role of protecting his family and said, love makes you do crazy things. That's like straight out of Kabir Singh's handbook.
Speaking of which, I made the mistake of watching the OG Arjun Reddy back, I think like a year after it came out, I think 2019. And
You recovered?
No, one second. I want to know why you even picked it up.
I don't know these people. There was so much hype around it, and people wouldn't. So I'm infamous for not watching films, but then Telugu films. So cousins will then say, "Hey, you have to watch this." No, you have to watch this. So sometimes I give in, and I have to say,
no. But again, I asked,
yeah,
have you recovered?
no, so first of all, it took me 3 days to complete the film, and it also reminded me of just why I don't watch Telugu movies.
Valid.
Yeah, so and then they went ahead and remade it for a much wider audience, which I still don't understand why. But yeah, I guess that's just it, no? This hyper masculinity is something that is so pervasive, it's nauseating. And I've repeatedly heard people say that, if a man hasn't reacted aggressively to a situation, that it is weird, and, then they make all sorts of assumptions. And that's also a problem, I think, because we've been so conditioned by films for so long that most of us will have such warped ideas of how a man should act. The first thing that popped into my head when I thought toxic masculinity was "Mard ko dard nahi hota," and that was also,
of course,
like and coincidentally, that was also the first hit on Google when I looked up toxic masculinity and Bollywood.
Oh.
And that, along with Amitabh Bachchan's angry young man era, apparently an angry hero covered in the blood of his enemies, was just the change that the film industry needed after years of romantic heroes. One writer called them lover boys who run around trees. So, that mindset is clearly still there. And, I love a good action film, and I'd prefer one over a rom-com any day. But the problem with a lot of action films, especially now, I think, is that it comes at the expense of the woman in the film. It's either a mother or a sister or a love interest. And these women always need to be avenged or retrieved from a kidnapper. And I came across Sauraja Chakravarti's newsletter, Alternate Take, where she writes about how women in Indian cinema are written into roles of the helpless damsel in distress. We all know the sort of scene, right? The villain is restraining the heroine and she tries to fight back. Only she's just flailing about and maybe hits him in the shoulder or face and doesn't do much damage. He barely moves. And
much like Chris Rock did not move.
Amazing core strength, by the way. Or it was a very weak slap, one of the two. But the other option for the heroine is, to girl boss up and bite the guy or kick him in the crotch and then run away. But even that escape doesn't last for more than a couple of minutes. In the same newsletter, Chakravarti writes about the fact that the independent woman trope, and how it compares characters in the same movie. So she compared Jaya Bachchan's character and Basanti in Sholay. Jaya Bachchan's character is from the word go, helpless just because she's been unfortunate enough to have been widowed. And Basanti is self-sufficient, but she has to then comply to the villain's demands to save Viru. And this is directly from the newsletter. Chakravarti writes, however, her bloodied feet and determination to save her lover is just not enough. Dharmendra is saved by his friend Jay, who lays down his life for him and his lady love. Yes, a woman can try to save a life, but that is never enough. It needs masculine aggression to save life, which is out. And, that's my biggest issue, I think, with the film industry, the way it frames protection and ownership to say that, our films and our heroes have major savior complexes is an understatement. And not just women, there's so many people who need saving: women, the elderly, children, the less fortunate, and only one man can save them. And this is,
Yeah, of course.
yeah, because it's the first example that popped into my head was Dabang, but there's also Kabir Singh or RRR, and there's so many others, and which is just the kind of thing that has been drilled into the heads of so many men, right? So you're the man of the house or the man in the relationship. You need to protect your bandi, otherwise you're just not man enough.
Or the man in the country, or man of the country, or man saving the country now. And that brings me to what I want to talk about, which is that art doesn't just imitate life, life imitate arts too. And that's clearly the case in our culture and resultantly our politics.
I still need a minute for that brilliant segue.
Yes.
Stunning.
So my first thought, obviously, when you talk about toxic masculinity, is not just Kabir Singh. It is somebody with a 56-inch ki chhati, whose chest girth has been a constant in our political discourse, symbolic of that aggressive alpha male who can protect the nation. That our Prime Minister has a 56-inch ki chhati has been a constant show of appreciation by his groupies, whether it was after he won Gujarat elections in 2007 or when he destroyed terrorist hideouts in Pakistan.
Yes, he personally destroyed it.
Yes.
Personally.
Yes. Funnily enough, I found a 2014 Business Standard piece that I will link in the description that compared the 56-inch claim to chest girths of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Khali and Hulk Hogan. कोई बीजेपी को बताओ यार, नेशन बिल्डिंग करना है, बॉडी बिल्डिंग नहीं करना है.
This is why we're journalists. Compare chest girths.
Also, Can I just say how weird a word girth is? I will just let you all sit in that.
Okay.
Moving on swiftly.
Now, other than this literal claim to manliness, we see that protector complex even in our government programs, schemes, and campaigns. Look at 2015 Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign. It advocates for protecting and educating girls rather than their empowerment. It came in the context of female infanticide and feticide. But when...
Yeah, empower karoge to fir protector kya karega?
Yeah. The girl is then relegated to a subordinate member of the household and somebody who needs protection all the time. And then there's UP with its anti-Romeo squads, launched in 2017. These squads were made up of plainclothes policemen and vigilante civilians who are dispatched to protect women, which in most cases ended up in nothing but harassing young couples who were found in public spaces together. Just another effort in limiting women's freedom by indulging in moral policing. So consensual relationships were totally thrown out of the window. And in society, you see it play out even more clearly in fueling Hindutva, protecting Hindu women from marrying Muslim men. Love jihad is exactly this. You forget women have agency and can express what they want. We don't just have this in political speeches. We also have the police, security establishment, and even courts going out of their way to prove women's lack of agency. Look at the Hadia case. The National Investigative Agency, NIA, said that Hadia's marriage to her Muslim husband was out of indoctrination and psychological kidnapping, whatever that means. And the Kerala High Court handed over Hadia's custody to her father, arguing that as per Indian tradition, the custody of an unmarried daughter is with the parents until she is properly married. Custody. Excuse me, custody. So we're saying that an adult woman is either in custody of her husband or of her parents. I don't even have to make a point anymore because the court has done it for me. Anyway, when we did research on these apps that auctioned off Muslim women, I remember reading one great article from 2019 talking about this anxious Hindutva masculinity in the EPW. I will link it in the description for you to check it out. It really, really hits home.
On that extremely personal note, we come to the end of our first segment. We will be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं, हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार।
Hello and welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. We're Team Splainer and make sure you follow us at SplainerIn on Instagram and Twitter to keep up with the Splainer fam. In today's Food for Thought, we're talking about India's first ever nomination at the Oscars in the documentary feature category for the movie Writing with Fire. Though the movie failed to win the Oscar, it catapulted a grassroots news organization called Khabar Lahariya to the global stage. So for those of you who don't know, Khabar Lahariya, which literally translates to Wave of News, is a news portal from the Hindi heartland. It started in 2002 as a weekly newspaper in Chitrakoot, Uttar Pradesh, but was primarily intended as a literacy project for women. The aim was simple, to bring together women from the most marginalized community, Dalit, Adivasi, and Muslim, and train them to produce news rather than just consume it passively. They published articles not just in Hindi, but in a variety of local dialects. Khabar Lahariya has since trained 500 journalists over its 20 years. To this day, its content is wholly written, edited, and distributed by women. In 2016, the organization went entirely online to take advantage of the smartphone revolution that lowered costs of publishing and actually hugely extended its reach. If it isn't already clear, their work is by far the best example of hyperlocal journalism that you can ever see. Their reporters cover everything from, stalled ration programs to local corruption to gender and caste violence. And they basically just focus on telling stories that matter the most to the people they cover. So it isn't about what sells. They know their audience and they know it better than anybody else. So now this extremely fascinating, interesting organization came a filmmaker duo, a couple named Rintu Thomas and Shushmit Ghosh, who made the documentary. Thomas discovered KL via a Facebook photo, and the two then contacted KL and they were invited to attend a team meeting, which happened to be the same one where they were fully discussing their shift to digital. So this was back in 2016, which is when they began filming as well. And they stayed embedded with the organization for 5 years, all the way up to the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. So the entire movie was shot with the least amount of equipment possible. So it was as natural per se, with just the couple and a cinematographer as part of the team. And they went in and out of their houses and on their stories and everything. They decided to center, artistically, the film on 3 Dalit women reporters, Meera Devi, Shamkali Devi, and Sunita Prajapati. And they followed them as they worked. So by 2021, the film was ready and it went around the film festival circuits across the world and was celebrated everywhere. Eventually, we know, it made it to the Oscars. But just about a week before the ceremony, Khabar Lahariya made public its discontentment with the documentary. They view their mission as giving voice to the marginalized and demanding accountability from those in power, but contend that the film frames their work within an anti-BJP narrative, which doesn't really do justice either to their vision or work. Initially, Thomas and Ghosh said, Khabar Lahariya's statement is an acknowledgement of the fractured and complex times we are in. While their statement is deeply disappointing to us, we remain committed supporters of their mission, work, and onward journey. And later, they owed the political narrative purely to the timing of the film, considering it was to the run-up of the elections, etc. But here's the deal. I don't necessarily understand, even for myself, what the crux of the problem is, okay? While on the one hand, yes, there is clear unfairness in power structures at play when filmmakers come from outside and, shoot a grassroots organization like this. But it's also undeniable that documentary filmmaking itself in India, especially one that has been moderately political, will sooner or later run into some trouble. So I think it's just a lot of gray areas that I haven't fully wrapped my head around. So
I think we can never really understand or wrap our heads around the problem until we see what the purpose of the film is. It's a documentary, and documentaries, from what I know and I have read, are films that are supposed to give us a perspective of like a fly on the wall, The point is to be completely objective and simply to record the reality, rather than taking any sort of stake in what's happening and what the circumstances and what the outcome might be. So, but what is this completely objective thing. Can anybody be completely objective? No matter how hard they try, it's extremely difficult for most filmmakers to objectively capture reality. In the process of filming, they become more and more familiar with characters and their subjects and draw conclusions of their own, and then biases start to appear.
I would argue it's not even it's completely impossible. It's just about limiting as much as possible, right? Your lived experiences will definitely show.
Yeah, they will. And this is closely linked to the problem of the gaze, which is very much entwined with power. Who has the power to determine the narrative? In this case, liberal intellectual filmmakers. The filmmaker Rintu Thomas said clearly that the power equation is never equal between a filmmaker and their protagonists. They needed to hear from us very clearly that we were not interested in framing this as a victim story. Neither was it going to be some patronizing superheroine narrative. We didn't know what our story was going to be, but we knew that we were interested in them as relatable, ordinary women with an extraordinary spirit. But then Khabar Lahariya, in their statement, said, we have not, as the film would have one believe, been able to carry our caste identities on our sleeves with bravado and humor, have had to be discreet, often fearful. And of course, how their 20 years of their grassroots work was presented in an anti-BJP narrative, which is far from truth. So some scholars of documentary filmmaking would argue exactly what Sara said, that looking for objectivity is a futile endeavor because it's just not possible. But then that makes me think that is documentary filmmaking a futile exercise in itself? You're trying to get to the truth, but the truth is affected by your biases. But I don't think it's futile. I think what is needed is that if you go in with the knowledge of who is behind the camera, you'll be fine. Look up the people who make what you watch, and you'll be better with separating the grain from the chaff, I think. And secondly, I'm glad that Khabar Lahariya put out a statement about how they feel about the film. If they didn't put it out, I wouldn't know that it's not really as black and white as the movie puts it out,
And, turns out the docu-film industry isn't all black and white either, because especially in India, I've read that documentary filmmakers have to jump through plenty of hoops to get their films off the ground. Because obviously, the first thing that we think of is the powers to be, like Khabar Lahariya says, about their caste identities and how that is portrayed in the film, right? Similarly, supporters of the filmmakers have said that the organization might have wanted to, with the statement, distance themselves, at least the management wanted to distance itself from making any broad political statements, given the timing of the Oscars and, the UP elections, which their supporters said, came pretty much one after the other. And I'm not trying to make any sweeping statements about any parties in particular, but in a similar vein, filmmakers, especially documentary producers and directors, have since the last year been speaking out about how the cinematograph amendment affects their film's distribution as well, because some of their films already don't see light of day. And with, all the recertification and everything that the amendment brings in, it's going to just get more difficult. And for an industry that is so unstable in these terms, their concerns, seem valid to me. According to renowned filmmaker Anand Patwardhan, films might receive critical acclaim or even make it to an international film festival, but the chances of a wider audience actually seeing the film and chances of the audience that it is meant for actually seeing the film.
Yeah, so Writing with Fire has still never released in India. And Khabar Lahariya said they actually saw the final version of it very, very recently, which is how their statement came now. They only saw rough edits.
Yeah, so in that same vein, Anand Patwardhan says that, almost all film festivals have this major focus on selling and buying. And so you have commissioning editors from a few Western, well-off countries that gather together in a small group. And then they basically vet the possible subjects and ways of filmmaking. Filmmakers play the game because the only way they can raise money is to prepare a 5-minute piece that will attract the commissioning editor, which basically means that filmmakers then have to resort to creating documentaries that outside mostly Western audiences or critics will like, in order to receive the funding to make films they want to make, because there just isn't any resources in the country. A Mint Lounge piece from last week says that several independent filmmakers are also claiming that their foreign funding is being withheld and they don't know why. Currently, to add to all this, currently there is the Film India Foundation for the Arts, the Public Service Broadcasting Trust, and Films Division. But these are the only three that provide funding for independent films. Yes, they do have an archive on YouTube where you can go and watch the films, but it's not very extensive. And, having an archive isn't much by a long shot when you could be reaching audiences through screenings, right? Shwetab Singh, who is the producer for award-winning Ibaleu, says breaking into OTT also is very difficult because streaming platforms would rather invest in formulaic films that are quote-unquote bankable, which, ironic given how much money and time Netflix has wasted on that Bahubali prequel. But, I'm no expert, so I wouldn't.
Of course. We're totally not attacking Telugu films to the entirety of this episode. On that note, we come to the end of this segment. We will be back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Think Fast, Suchita invited me to talk about the evolution of the audio industry. And besides the audio industry, we talked about a whole bunch of other things like the Zomato-Blinkit potential merger, the Mumbai 2050 climate plan, and a whole bunch of other things. Fun episode, do check that out. On Press Decode, Sara, Vagda, Prafula, and Nivedita discuss the accuracy of the Kashmir files and associated movie politics. On The Longest Constitution, Priya examines the issue of livelihood along with why women aren't a part of parliament. On Say No to Drama, Chetna explains why you should celebrate filing your income tax rather than feeling bad about it. And on All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk discuss India's reserves of oil in light of the oil supply shock created by the Russia-Ukraine war. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. Also, remember, we're on YouTube. You can check us out on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube and get a list of all the YouTube channels we have active at this point. I'd also like to make a quick note that we're doing a small listener survey, and it would really help us if you could fill that out. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance and India Water Portal. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. It's time for our final segment this week, Roast or Toast. Prafula, the stage is yours.
So recently, there's a customer service app called TDO. And recently they surveyed over 1,191 people to see if there is a market for AI in people's love lives in the future. Because and I found out about this also from this article, there are apparently 1,500 dating apps and websites operating worldwide at the moment. I had no idea. And this market is projected.
Wait, does this account for Indian marriage type thingies also?
I don't think so.
Oh, so you think that's a separate market? Because
I think so, yeah.
Don't ask me why and how I know, but I know there are a lot. And how there are very specific niches of this.
Yes.
Yeah, in Indian matrimonial has to be specific, don't you know? But yeah, there is apparently a projected reach for this market at $9.2 billion by 2025. So researchers are now training AI to sense red flags in your relationships and when this AI will be ready, it might be able to tell you that it's time to break up with your significant other, which it will then base off your messages, voice notes, and even video or motion capture to read body language. So it is snooping on you to tell you, hey, it's time to say bye.
1 second. Why is snooping on me to tell me, or is it snooping on my person I'm dating?
I'm assuming this is on your phone. So like the messages you are sending based off the messages and voice notes you are sending them, whether it's time to break up. So obviously
So what is this? AI, is this a therapist?
I would honestly, the people that they surveyed might just need a therapist, and I will tell you why. Because the AI is far from complete, but of the people that they surveyed, 7% said they would end things immediately if the AI told them to.
Wow, that's a lot of trust.
Yes, and then 48% more said that they would keep an eye out for red flags following this advice. And 45% more said they wouldn't take any advice from the AI with the caveat that they really liked the person that they were dating.
Okay.
And we thought
So this is
dating
that-
apps were bad.
So this is that group chat where we're like telling someone like, oh my God, the person's not great, but like creepier. Already there, I'm just like, why does somebody else have so many opinions? But now it's
Yeah,
not even a
does the
person.
computer have an opinion about me?
Yeah, like, of course.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a fave item this week, but it is the best news from the metaverse. Daler Mehndi became the first Indian to buy real estate on the Indian metaverse platform Party Night. And he has named it, surprise, surprise, Balle Balle Land. You get to do it, Vagda. I can't.
I do.
So, I mean, Vagda was basically doing Balle Balle. The plan is to hold concerts, events, movie screenings, and sell NFTs, all of which will be suitably Balle Balle, no doubt. Man, I can't believe it. All it took was some tunak to finally make me a crypto bro. I am so invested, it's not funny. Like, thanks, Daler Mehndi. You're truly the real one.
No, I think there will be some entry requirement in Balle Balle Land. They'll ask you, especially if you're a Malayali Christian, if you can recite any of his songs properly.
Hey, I can do tunak, but
Let's hear some.
moving on swiftly.
Wait, so on Twitter, somebody said Daler Mehndi was already in the metaverse in the 90s. Look at the video for Tunak Tunak.
That is too funny, man.
That's actually very accurate.
Okay, so we'll put that
Yeah.
in the description as well. You should check it out.
He's the real one, yaar. 2 a.m. at parties, any a.m. in the metaverse. He's just balle-balling it up, yaar.
My favorite this week is this clip of a 13-year-old Dalit boy schooling a reporter in Banaras. I'm putting the link in the description, so please check it out. The video is in Hindi, where this reporter asked him, this boy, what he would like to be when he grows up. And he responds he'd like to be an IS officer and serve the society. When what he would prefer to have, a temple or a school. He said, I would rather be in a classroom, adding that God has not blessed us. God will not give us anything, but education will. And then we will study and we will get a job. And there's a lot more to this exchange, which I'm not going to ruin with English translation. So please go and watch it. I love that boy's confidence.
It truly is worth a watch. And anyway, that was our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on Press Decode. You can catch us every Thursday on the IVM Podcast Network. And guys, please remember, don't let the news give you the blues.
Love fighting?
We've got you covered.
Check out our show, The Fighting Goat, where we, the voices of the internet, Arjun Chipalkatti and Somesh Kamra, bring to you crazy weekly action on your favorite combat show, The Fighting Goat.
Be it commentary, breakdown, predictions, analysis of styles and techniques.
And of course, your round of favorite fighters.
You can listen to us every Thursday on the IBM Podcast app, website, and all major podcast streaming platforms.
Ladies, I'm sure you will relate to it if I say that we are constantly busy with work, studies, cooking, and what not. And amidst all of this, we often forget an important element that needs our desperate attention: finance. So here we are, bringing to you SBI Life Presents A Sip of Finance, a women-exclusive podcast where we will teach you how to manage personal finances in a simple and straightforward way with your host, Priyanka Acharya, a finance expert who's been in the industry for 14 plus years. And not just in English, but in 7 more languages. So tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes on the IBM Podcast Network and all major podcast streaming platforms.